Today I'm going to talk about alternative methods of creating glitchy basses and effects, because in my previous tutorial I only used harsh digital noise, which while it's a good free plugin, it's kind of limited in some aspects. So today I'm going to be using a few different methods, including FM synthesis, and this method of loading in audio files as waveforms. The thing I'm going to start off by showing is the way I make these kinds of sounds with FM synthesis. So in this little preview here, the sounds that have been created through FM are these two. And without effects, they sound like this. So it would actually make more sense if I showed the effects first, because the only thing that's going on in the effects is a bit of distortion. So here there's asymmetrical distortion on this one. And then there's some EQing. The patcher just has this, the high frequencies are being widened with a chorusing effect, and this EQ is just kind of shaping the sound, and then it's all being compressed. And in this one, the biggest change to the sound through the effects is this vocoder, which is on 128 bands and the bandwidth is being modulated. But yeah, I'm just going to get straight into FM synthesis. So I'm using Citrus, but I'm pretty sure you can do this with any FM synth. So we start off with just a sine wave. What I'm going to do is change this frequency ratio to 64, which is putting the pitch incredibly high on the sound. Like, I'm not even going to preview it because it's just ear piercing. And then we're going to frequency modulate operator 1 or oscillator 1 by operator 2, which is also a sine wave. And we're also going to change the frequency ratio to 64. So this is what we've got so far. It's this really harsh sound, and you can already kind of hear through different notes it's kind of creating a different sound, and that's going to be greatly enhanced when we change the frequency ratio of operator 2 from 64 to 63. So now it's not in perfect pitch with operator 1. And you get all these really cool sounds just by hitting different notes. And of course you can use other frequency ratios, and it's going to create different tones depending on what you put this at. You also don't have to stick with a sine wave. You can just mess around with anything. This is just kind of how I get the basis of the sound. I actually like to change the sine wave in operator 1 to a pulse width wave with a really low width, and you get this sound. And it's like really messy, but by clicking this band limit waveform option, we can make it less messy. I'm not actually sure what this does, but it just kind of cleans up the sound, as opposed to. And that's actually exactly how these two sounds in the preview were made. The only thing is that they've got they have a sub bass as well, which is just a sine wave being produced by one of the other oscillators. The first one, this one has some ring modulation, which you can do just by going into the ring modulation option, and it's got a very slow kind of sine wavy thing, like this. Even slower than that, actually. There we go. And the other FM sound in the preview is frequency modulating operator 2 by a waveform, just very slightly. Yeah, just experiment with this really, change the waveform types, mess around with filters, distort it, do weird things. So these are the next type of sounds I'm going to show you guys how to make. And what this involves is loading in an audio file as a waveform. Not in the way that Serum does it, where like every bit of the sound generates its own waveform and you can scroll through the sound, but actually loading in an entire audio clip to be its own waveform. And this is just easier to show than to explain, so I'll just pick a sample. So I'll use this sample, and in 3xoxo, the way you can load in an audio file as a waveform is either just by dragging and dropping it onto sample and then clicking the question mark thing, or you can click the question mark thing and then it'll bring up options for what you want to load in. So once this is loaded in, we get this sound. And messing around with the pitch on this sound kind of messes with like the kind of texture you're gonna get. Like if you play it really low, you're playing it slower, so it's almost playing the audio clip just at different pitches, if that makes sense. And you get this glicky kind of sound. And if you play it really high, you get a lot of weird sounds. And like most of these kind of glitchy things I'm going to show you, playing different notes and different pitches will create a different sound or texture. And obviously loading in different audio files is going to create a different sound. And within 3xoxo, you've got all these options to kind of mess with it, like say Pogo and this sine effects thing, which is a legacy effect. You can make a bunch of cool stuff. And I think one of the coolest things with this type of sound is when you do pitch sliding, it like just goes crazy and it sounds like it's going through an entire waveform. So this is what it sounds like when I'm pitch sliding from F sharp to F, as opposed to just playing F sharp. It's just really weird. So just to kind of continue on with this idea, this sound here, without any effects, it sounds like this. And what I've done is loaded in this audio clip here, geosynth chorus thingy.wave, which I'm pretty sure is in my sample pack somewhere. And I'm playing it quite low to get that glicky effect. Then in the post effects, I've got this phaser going on with 23 stages, which means there's 23 phasing poles throughout the sound, and the minimum depth of this is being automated. And it's getting that really vocally kind of effect. And if you listen to Fellow Feeling, or really any other kind of noise bassy genre style of music, you can hear sounds like this, and just by messing with extremities of plugins you can get really cool sounds, and adding that on top of like a kind of experimental idea, you can get some really cool stuff. So yeah, just to reinforce the idea, experiment with things, just try whatever. Another technique to creating these kind of weird sounds that I haven't used in this little preview thing involves taking a sine wave and pitching it up really, really high. So this is pitching it up 48 semitones, and then here it's being pitched up another 24 semitones. And if we look at this EQ, we'll see that the sine wave is actually out of human hearing. So it's above 20,000 hertz, so we can't actually hear that. And this EQ is not cutting it off. So this 3xoxo is just producing this single sine wave, and it's being sent to this mixer slot. And if we distort the sound with this wave shaper, which is wave shaping it incredibly harshly, it'll create some weird sounds. And if you change the type of distortion from like wave shaping to this camel crusher, where everything is like put up all the way, the compressor isn't on the fat mode though, you'll get a kind of different sound. It sounds a bit cleaner. And like loading the audio file into 3xoxo, when you pitch slide, it creates really kind of bizarre movement. And like the other methods of sound creation that I've covered, different notes will produce different tones and textures. Another cool thing you can do with this, you can also do this with like the FM method or the audio file method, is to introduce a second oscillator that is very, very slightly, like about 1 or 2 cents different to the first oscillator. And that's going to create a racing effect. But within the context of this really weird sound, it actually sounds really cool. As opposed to. And that's because the difference in pitch creates such a wild variation that it's not just phase cancelling the sound, it's actually kind of producing a different sound alongside it, if that makes sense. But yeah, that's just another kind of cool technique you can use. So the next method of sound creation I'm going to show involves high resonances, and it sounds like this. And without any effects, it sounds like this. And this sound is coming from a plugin called Wasp, which I think is an image line thing. And this sound is basically built up on this low pass and notch filter. Like, if I take away all the resonance from this sound, it sounds like this. It's basically just a really low played saw wave. It's also half mixed in with a really low square wave, and there's some ring modulation and pulse width modulation going on, but I'm not sure exactly how this works within Wasp, but it just kind of makes the sound a bit choppy, but really, really fast. You can achieve this just by using a ring modulation plugin in the post effects, and the cutoff is being modulated through an automation clip. And that's giving the tone to the sound. Because there's such high resonance, it doesn't actually matter what note is being played, the resonance is like determining what note we're hearing, if that makes sense. Then there's some asymmetrical distortion and some just regular wave shaping, really, really harsh, and the whole sound is being cut off so you only hear the really high frequencies. And this is what gives it that kind of, like ringy, cymbally sound, like that. And if you listen to Flume's remix of You and Me, I think it is, you can kind of hear a sound like this in the drop. Then after that is some compression. It doesn't need to be multiband, I've just compressed the master and that's to keep it all level. And then there's some reverb just to make it kind of a more ambient sound. And I'm using a free plugin called Epic Verb, and the dry wet is halfway between no reverb and complete reverb. And sounds like this can just kind of fill out a mix. And the last sound I'm going to show you guys is actually a silent sound, which sounds like this. And without any effects, it sounds like this. And I just kind of wanted to mention this because I don't think a lot of people use Silent as a sound design tool, but it can actually be really kind of interesting. Like if you listen to Geotheory's song Venus, I think, at the start of the song there's this kind of weird plucky noise. And when I heard it, I thought of the phaser and the chorus in Silent. Because if you turn the feedback all the way up on the phaser, turn the LFO rate and gain off so it's not moving around on its own, and just kind of mess with the center frequency, the spread, and the width, and then on top of that add the chorus with really high feedback, you can get this kind of metallic-y, almost like granulated kind of sound. And when you add things like distortion, you can get these really interesting sounds. Even like for chord sounds, you can get this really kind of weird stuff. But specifically speaking for this sound, the phaser and the chorus is basically what's making the sound what it is. Because it's just a really low saw wave with a lot of stereo and some detuning, and the distortion's kind of making it feel clicky because it's a bit crush type of distortion. So with the phaser it sounds like this, and the center frequency is being manipulated, and then with the chorus it sounds like this. And all that's happening in the post effects is like some EQing, compression, making it really stereo wide, to the point where it's phasing so much I don't even think there's any mid to the sound, it's complete side. And then some EQing so that the high frequencies are really loud and there's no like low frequencies because it sounds kind of muddy. Oh, and then there's some volume automation as well, just to kind of make sure it doesn't bleed off after it's meant to stop. But yeah, so I also just wanted to say that the reason I'm doing these tutorials isn't to have some kind of definitive technique towards something. I'm just trying to introduce ideas and like concepts to you guys that you might find useful, because everything's subjective when it comes to sound design. Like, there is no right or wrong. And that being said, if anyone wants me to explain something from one of my songs, like a sound or maybe something I did like percussion-wise, whatever, I'm completely happy to explain anything. Just either leave a comment on this video or send me a message. I'll put the FLP to this in the description. I think I'll also put some updated samples from my sample pack in the description, or something, I don't know. So I hope this has helped you guys with kind of thinking about different methods of creating these kinds of sounds.